So I'll move on to a little bit of an overview of sort of some of the ways in which you can optimize performance through, the different layers of the stack. And again, I'll start with an analogy to try and, liven it up and make it easily understandable. But if I was to ask you got two cars, one's a 1.6 litre and one's a 4.5 litres, which is faster? What would your intrinsic answer to that question be? Any answers on that one? I can say
like
I would
4.5.
yeah, you'd say the 4.5. Yeah, you'd probably say the 4.5 is probably faster than a 1.6, right? But what if the 1.6 is a Formula One Ferrari and the 4.5 is Toyota Land Cruiser diesel, which is faster then? Okay.
Of
the
course,
Ferrari is faster.
Yeah.
Okay. What if the race is 1,000 kilometers long and you can't refuel?
So the answer is it really depends.
Yeah, that's the answer. It really depends, and there's a whole range of factors, behind it. And the same is absolutely true with site performance, and you can't just focus on one of them. You've got to consider all of them. If you've got to carry 4 passengers versus 1, the Ferrari is not going to be very useful to you and is not going to win the race. So you've got to think of all of these parameters. So to give you an example of this, and one of the kind of things I'm very passionate about personally, because we see this in our interactions with people that are making inquiries with WP Engine all the time, is, there's this obsession over server specs, right? That, all you need to do to make your site faster is get a bigger or a faster server. And, it's so much more complicated than that. And that is so much not an apples to apples comparisons of other providers because of all of these other factors that I'm going to run through. So an example to show this, as I mentioned at the start, I'm a Liverpool fan. So this is a Liverpool fan site, Empire of the Kop. And down the bottom right-hand corner, you can see a web page test, which is a performance result, for that site. So you can, I don't know if you can make out the numbers at the bottom, but I'll walk through them. You can see that the time to first byte, where's that? Time to first byte
16
is 1.
seconds, is that right? No,
that's the fully loaded time. Yeah, fully loaded is 16 seconds, but the first byte is 1.7 seconds. So the initial response from the hosting platform that's serving up that first piece of content is 1.7 seconds, but it's then taken 17 seconds to load the whole thing. Right?
Yeah, that seems like eternity in this age.
It seems like eternity, yeah. And yeah, I guess this site can get away with it because us Liverpool fans are pretty loyal and we're going to stay on the site anyway. We're not going to bounce off and go to a Manchester United site, right? But the point is that this 17 seconds is too long for most sites. But the initial response from the person requesting the first piece of information to the website and the host and the server responding to that is only 1.7 seconds. So what's happening between those two is all of the content on that homepage is being downloaded, and that's what's taking too long. The site isn't optimized, right? Like the images are too big, or there's too many images, or the code is inefficient, whatever. You can see some green and red lights on the web page test. I won't get into those details, but the point I'm trying to make is, typically with most customers, there is far more scope for improving the speed of your website through optimizing the site from a code and from a content perspective than there is through upgrading servers. So another example is if you've got small car with a 1.1 litre engine, you've got 4 big guys in it going up a hill, it's going to go slowly, right? So yes, you could put a bigger engine in and make it go faster, but if 3 of the guys got out, that's also going to help. So you need to try and think of it more holistically. And as I say, there's optimizations that could be made at every layer of the stack. This is the good news, right? So there's lots of things that you can do before you even think about having to upgrade hardware or focusing on that as the problem. So let's start on the infrastructure side. So it's 3 big questions you need to ask. Where's your website hosted? How is it hosted? And what is it doing? The answer to those questions is going to impact the performance that you get. So looking at the first one, where's your site hosted? Obviously, it needs to be hosted close to your intended audience, right? So if you've discovered through web page, through your web stats, through your Google Analytics that most of your users are coming to the site from the US, but your server is in Hong Kong, then that's not ideal for your customers, right? And some sites might have a lot of visits from different parts of the world, and they need to think about how they're going to deliver that content to them locally. But pretty simple concept. You want to make sure that your website is hosted as close as possible to where most of your audience are.
Okay.
You also want to understand how it's hosted. So this does get into the infrastructure piece, right? This is the one element that everyone kind of focuses on and obsesses on in most cases. But this is important. I'm not saying it's unimportant. You need to make sure you're with a provider that uses good quality infrastructure, that you're on infrastructure that is appropriately sized. But whether using on-premise versus cloud hosting and what the performance, profile of that is also important. Not all infrastructure is created alike. And then the third thing is, what is your website doing? So there is a world of difference between a website that serves static images and content that doesn't change, and a website that delivers, e-commerce capabilities or has, membership, functionality where people are logged in and retrieving information that's personalized to them. Because, static content, I'll come on to caching later, but static content can be quickly served from caching layers. And that minimizes the work that the underlying infrastructure has to do. Whereas a more dynamic site that has to interrogate the database to process an e-commerce transaction, or work out what courses someone logging into an LMS system is going to consume, that's far more intense, and those caching layers typically can't help with that type of traffic. So one website with 50,000 visits a month may not perform the same as another website with 50,000 visits a month, or require the same amount of infrastructure or hardware to power it. Second area where you can optimize is applications and the caching layer. So I mentioned this caching word before. What is caching? A caching is basically just a buffer. You can think of it as a buffer that stores regularly accessed information, so that rather than having to go back to the infrastructure and find that information and generate it every time, it just serves it from the buffer. And there's all sorts of caching out there in the world of our tech. Your MacBook will do it if you've got a MacBook, or any laptop. Mail does it, right? The post office is basically like a cache, and websites do it as well, right? And they do it with things like content delivery networks that save content in different locations so that it can be quickly served to your users wherever they are. And there's different types of caching that you can use. The one that people typically use, and I'm going to put a bit of WordPress context around that because that's obviously what we can speak about most knowledgeably. But plugin based caching is very easy to use, right? You just find a plugin that makes your server faster, and like Total Cache or something along those lines, and away you go. At the same time, server level caching is far more effective. So the reason why is that anything that requires you to install a plugin on your site, or requires traffic to come to your site before it can be actioned, is ultimately putting more pressure on that server, on that infrastructure. So if you can push that work away from the server, put it in front, then it's gonna be a far better experience. It's going to reduce the load on that server, and it's going to reduce the number of requests that are hitting it. So this is super complex and nerdy, and I'm not going to get into it, but it is complicated, right? There's multiple different layers at which you can and should apply caching in order to get a site performing well. And most CMS platforms or content management systems do not do this out the box, right? So make sure that you're working with someone who understands this if you don't understand it. And that isn't always going to be a developer, right? Developers aren't always going to be performance focused. They're going to be focused primarily on building code and functionality. So make sure you're working with experts that can help make sure you're set up in the most optimal way. as I mentioned, certain types of sites, particularly shopping and membership, bypass caching. So, whereas with a brochureware site on our platform, we would typically see 80% of the requests to a brochureware site served from our caching layers. So that traffic wouldn't even hit our servers because it's being served from cache before it gets there. With a shopping and membership site, you may only get 20% of that traffic being served from cache, which means 80% is actually hitting the server and the infrastructure. And hence, for the site with the same amount of traffic, you may need something 4 or 5 times more powerful to serve it, because you're getting 4 or 5 times the number of requests actually hit the infrastructure itself. Does that make sense? I know that it's a little bit complicated.
No, actually it does, right? Because the fact that most of the content there is so dynamic in nature, right? It just sort of makes sense to get it fresh from the server directly. Is that a right interpretation?
Yeah, if you have to get something generated by the server directly, that server is doing work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So anything that's dynamic basically forces the server to do work, and that slows it down. Anything that's not dynamic, that's static, that can be cached, can be served very quickly without adding any additional load to the server. So it's far more efficient. So this goes back to the point I was making at the start, whereas as the emerging consumers demanding more and more dynamic experiences and sites, that is putting more and more pressure on performance, because sites are driving more computational intensity.
Correct. So in fact, in general, right, every site, every nature of even your website for that matter, right? The website of WP Engine would look different to different people, right? Or so no matter whether you are a subscription business or a shopping site or a content publication, right? You would sort of at some point in time look at server level caching at some point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, it's a complicated area. So work with specialists that are going to understand this stuff, because it's also changing all the time, right? Like anything in technology, right? It's constantly moving goalposts, and sites are changing all the time as well. They're not static, right? People are updating them. They're changing the functionality. So this is why managing performance as a permanent, ongoing process is so important.
It's so important that because a lot of times people assume that it's done once and done, and people approach it as a project, and wherein at the moment we hit 95 on Google page speed insights, that's when they say job done, right? And that's when the project is parked aside. But the fact that it's just really a day in, day out job, right?
So you either need a team that can manage this, or you need to work with someone that's going to do it for you. Google actually, on that point, presented a stat again at our summit when they talked about performance budgeting, and they said that of sites that optimize for better performance, that do it as a project, as you said, within 6 months, 40% of them had regressed back to their original performance level. So within 6 months, almost half had regressed back. And that's because they weren't monitoring it, and they weren't, they didn't have a framework around making sure that they sustained that level of performance as the site continued to change and evolve.
Yeah, right. So it is a full-time job also now. Simple as that.
So I talked about caching. I mentioned CDN briefly. For almost every site, you should use a CDN. It will cache copies of your content at points of presence close to your users. It will reduce overhead on your servers. So, there's different types of CDN out there. Full page CDNs are better than the static CDNs. They will do a better job of caching. And in some cases, they can even cache some dynamic requests if they are dynamic requests that are being generated in a consistent way or multiple times. But for almost every site, implementing a content delivery network is a good idea. And most of those web page test tools, the front end page test tools like web page test, that's one of the checks they will give. So they will give you a green or a red light as to whether you've got a CDN in place or not. Another thing which you can do, which makes sense, across the board, is when you're using secure sockets, so secure certificates, which everyone should be now, because otherwise you're going to get penalized by Google, and your site isn't going to be secure. To have those SSL certificates terminated at the edge, not on your server. So providers like Cloudflare, again, is a partner that's integrated into our platform. They allow you to do that. So, essentially the handshake that a secure certificate does is done at the edge network, not done on your server. So again, all these little things that you can do, all add up, right? It's like, if you think of a sales funnel, right? And everyone always says, if you can make a 5% improvement at, 5 different layers of a sales funnel, you're going to get a 500% improvement in sales, right? All those little changes multiply out and really add up. Using a fast DNS host is super important as well. So your DNS is basically translating, your URL or your www.wpengine.com to an IP address. And believe it or not, some DNS hosts are faster than others and by up to 150 milliseconds. And that website here will tell you, how your DNS provider compares in terms of performance. So you can actually, have a look and make sure you're with a nice fast DNS. Cloudflare is, as I say, a partner of ours that we integrate with, and we definitely recommend them. Finally, sort of front end, performance optimizations and speed traps. So I'll cover a few of those. There's some optimization plugins out there. Again, this is the WordPress specific context, but other CMSs work in similar ways that allow you to what's called minify, which basically reduce and concentrate HTML and CSS. So basically what they do is they just squash all the amount of data that is being served to users and make it smaller. Right, so if the data is less, then it's going to be faster, right? It's as good as making your server bigger. So easy to use and a high ROI. So again, things like WP Rocket, EW Optimizer, these optimization plugins typically will make sense for most people. Images, I just spoke about one of those image optimizers, EWW Image Optimizer. There's a bunch of other ones out there. But different file formats, different image file formats have different file sizes. And if you've got a homepage, we see this all the time, where people have got uncompressed images or images saved in inefficient file formats like animated GIF, then that's going to have an impact on your site performance, and it's going to lead to results like I shared earlier with the Empire of the Cops site, where you've got 17 seconds to load it. You optimized. So got to ask a question, do you really need a 4K by 3K hero image at 300 ppi on a website, right? Think about what you actually need and don't upload images that are bigger and heavier than they need to be.
Yeah.
So again, there's tools and plugins that do that for you. Work with an expert if you're not. Another area where we see people often neglecting free gains to performance is simply not running on the latest version of PHP. Right, so 45% of the web still uses PHP 5. As you can see from that graph, every version of PHP is faster than the previous one, and it's just a free boost. Right, all you got to do is upgrade to the latest version of PHP. You've got to make sure your website's compatible, and we've got a compatibility checker in the WordPress repository that people can use. It's freely available to anyone. You don't have to be a WP Engine customer. Just search for PHP compatibility checker. But you really should take advantage of this because it's just such a simple no-brainer.
Right.
And another one is just offloading assets that you're not using or that aren't a core part of your content management system or don't need to be there. So excuse me, obvious ones are things like videos. Use something like YouTube or Brightcove. Use a third-party platform for serving that stuff. They're designed specifically for that purpose. Same with audio files. anything that you can get off your server and onto a third-party platform is going to help improve the performance of your site. Okay.
Yeah. So on the previous one, right?
Yeah.
There are dozens and dozens of video players out there, or video hosting providers out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've obviously picked up the most famous and the most reliable ones, right? How should somebody be, choosing, making this choice? Because it becomes a tricky call when they're sort of looking at additional functionalities from some of these video players, right? For example, Vistia goes beyond just hosting your videos. They also help you do lead generation using videos, right?
Mm-hmm.
YouTube also helps you play ads and so on and so forth, right? But these are very, very straightforward choices to be made. There are every player is sort of now trying to build its own USP by saying, okay, you know what, we will serve ads and we'll help you monetize, or we'll do something X, we'll do something X and Y and Z, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we sort of pick up one of these platforms, right, how should we sort of go about what's that decision making criteria for this?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's often missed, and that we don't have affiliations with video serving platforms, right? It's really a business decision based on the functionality requirements and strategy of the the site owner.
Yeah.
One thing that we see that people often don't do is consider the long-term roadmap for their site. Right, so changing providers is is work, right? It's time. It's time spent evaluating different options and getting agreements in place and doing a technical change to your site and so on. So I guess we would always encourage people to try and think of something that's going to serve them for the long haul. Don't just pick the first plugin that's going to serve your immediate, the first tool or platform that's going to serve your immediate need right now. Think about what you might need in 6 or 12 months or 2 years in the future, because probably your site is going to change and evolve, and you want to be with a platform that's going to support that. For some businesses, it might be appropriate to have ads in their video content. For others, it might not. Is going to have better information to make an informed decision than we would be able to advise as a WordPress platform provider.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay.
Another area where people can improve, we've put here start with blocks instead of themes. So WordPress 5 has a new visual page editor called Gutenberg. It uses visual blocks that are reusable, so it makes the process of creating content a lot easier and a lot more structured. And it enables you to build sites easily without necessarily using a full theme. And the issue with themes is that, particularly free themes, which we'd urge people to, steer clear of, they often come with bloated functionality and content that's not required. So, if you think about someone that's building a free theme, they're trying to cater for a wide audience, right? They want as many people as possible to use it. And therefore, they're typically going to have a lot of different stuff in there, some of which you don't need. And therefore, if you've got a bloated theme, you're straight away starting away with a performance hit on your site. So if you can actually build your site without a theme, or if you do have to use a theme, use a theme that is designed specifically for the business that you're in, right? So if you're real estate or publishing, try and use a theme that's built for that, so that it doesn't have anything superfluous, and so that it runs as efficiently as possible for your specific business. Make sense?
You know what? This is such a sensitive topic. I think it could be a standalone webinar in itself, because
it could be.
Yeah, because the amount of bloatware that's available with some of the themes, and if you pick up the wrong thing, if you have a one-page website and you pick up a full-blown visual builder for that, it just adds unnecessary load, right? And it makes it so inefficient. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying there's never a place for themes. I mean, we provide access to StudioPress themes to our customers, and, you know, there's some fantastic themes in there. But
Yeah,
I guess, you know, definitely at minimum steer clear of anything that is not built, you know, for your type of business specifically, because it's probably bloated. It's probably got stuff in there that you don't need. It's probably going to give you a performance tax. But you're right. A
true.
lot of these topics could be, you know, talks of their own for, you know, 45 minutes or more. But being frugal with plugins from a WordPress perspective, and again, most other CMSs, you want to minimize, you know, the number that you're using. You want to remove them when you're no longer using them critically. You know, even if you're not using a plugin actively, it's still leaving a footprint, you know, if it's installed. So physically deinstall anything that you don't need. You know, best practice, they say, is less than 20, but it does depend on the efficiency of your plugins. And that's where a tool like New Relic, which looks at application performance, as I mentioned earlier, can really help, because it's going to help you identify how your plugins are performing. You know, there's a site called pipinsplugins.com that's got 86 plugins on it, and it loads in like 3 or 4 seconds, because they're all, you know, efficient, you know, plugins, and the site still works really well. Whereas you might have 10 plugins, but one of them's a real, you know, resource hog, and your site goes slow. So most important thing, you know, again, have a monitoring place that allows you to quickly identify if something is having a big performance tax on your site, including a plugin. Avoid admin Ajax like the plague. Again, quite a tech one, but admin Ajax uses Apache to dynamically render elements on a page. That is incredibly resource intensive and impossible to cache. So, you know, again, try everything that you can to, you know, to avoid using it, and encourage your developers equally to do likewise. Lazy load is great. What it does is basically only loads initially what's being seen on your site. So if you've got a page that's, you know, where people would normally scroll down, you don't have to load the whole scrolled page, you know, before, you know, in one go. You can just load the bit that someone's going to see in their initial view, and then load the rest when they scroll down and when they need to. And again, you know, that's all about just being more efficient and not, you know, adding work or downloading stuff that you don't need, you know, right now, or may not need at all. I know DB, this is another, you know, relatively straightforward one that a lot of people miss. So, you know, MySQL used by WordPress has a traditional MyISAM database engine, but it's not very efficient. I know DB, if you can switch over to that, it locks off less of the data when accessing a table and makes it far faster. So if you've got a database, a site that you know is with a big database that's used quite intensely, you know, this is going to give you a big boost if you're not doing it already. And finally, clean your database, right? So, you know, like anything over time, you know, like your house or your car, you accumulate junk over a period of time, and you need to clean it out. So there's plugins out there like, you know, Advanced Database Cleaner that you can use to automate that process, to make it easier to clean out stuff that you no longer need. WP Sweep is another one. Again, remember to deinstall those plugins once you've finished using them, because you don't need to be installed all the time. And, you know, there's a lot of content out there, but I'd like to kind of give an example of what success looks like, right? So, you know, obviously at WP Engine, with, you know, all of the customers that we support, with our focus on, you know, being the unequivocal leader in performance for WordPress sites and WordPress hosting. You know, we focused a lot of effort on constantly trying to improve performance over time. And this shows the average latency of one of our pods over the course of 2019. And as you can see, it's gone down, you know, consistently over the course of the year, as we have, you know, constantly done, you know, PHP upgrades and, you know, all the different tweaks that we've done as technology evolves to try and constantly improve performance. So, you know, this is possible. And if you're going to deliver increasingly rich and more dynamic digital experiences to your customers, then, you know, you need to be, you know, making up for that by, you know, doing everything that you can on the other side to try and help your site run more efficiently over time as well. Interestingly as well, we actually upgraded all of our customers to the latest Google instances called C2 instances last year. which are the latest generation of processing technology, essentially. And that has a huge performance benefit, but this graph actually excludes that. So even without
Wow.
that hardware upgrade that we were able to do to give our customers access to the latest hardware, we were still able to achieve a significant increase in performance over time. And there's a little blog article there that sort of talks through the things that we did over the year to achieve that as well, which might be useful for the audience.
Interesting. Yeah.